Hello, and welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul-led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Meller. Welcome or welcome back. It's so wonderful to have you here. Now, what if our obsession with complete and balanced was never really about food, but about fear? That's exactly what we're diving into today. I love all of my guests and all of my conversations, but this is definitely one of my favorite conversations. Today, I sit down with my colleague and kindred spirit, Georgina of Georgina's Kitchen, a canine nutrition consultant in India, whose dog's seizures at the age of 3 led her down a path of deep research, intuition, and awe for the intelligence of nature. We talk about what dogs really need to thrive, not just survive, and how one simple act of curiosity blew the lid off both of our ideas about nutritional perfection. Georgina shares how she independently tested zinc levels in local beef liver samples and discovered results that completely changed the way that she thought about standards of feeding. And when I learned about them, really helped me to release so much of my own fear and need for control. This is a conversation about returning to relationship with food, with nature, with dogs, and ultimately with ourselves. It's about how fear masquerades as science, how control hides inside quote-unquote doing it right, and how trust begins when we remember that life, like food, is alive. You'll hear about what the NRC, AFCO, and FEDF guidelines were really made for, and why they were never really meant to define what thriving looks like. How the fear of getting it wrong has shaped the dog feeding world, and what happens when we start feeding from trust instead of control. The difference between food-based and nutrient-based thinking, and why one nourishes the soul while the other feeds the spreadsheet. When just-in-case supplementation becomes too much, and how less can sometimes mean more life. Georgina's take on the growing trend of vegan diets is also something that we talk about, and what she's learned from street dogs. And there's a deeper invitation to listen, to learn, and to remember that the body, canine or human, is far wiser than the formula. This isn't a conversation about numbers, it's about trust. It's about remembering that the goal isn't perfect, it's presence. And that thriving doesn't come from a label, it comes from a relationship. Now, speaking of relationships, if you would like to be part of a community of like-hearted dog guardians and learn how to put our Learn Fetch framework into action to support your dog's optimal health, then come join Fetch First Light. It's our free Facebook group where we show you how to support your individual dog through a focus on fresh food, energetics, targeted approaches, asking different questions, and taking a whole dog approach to health. We'd love to have you there. Just search Fetch First Light on Facebook or follow the link in the show notes. All right, on that note, let's go. Hi, Georgina. Thank you so much for joining me on the Mystic Dog Mama podcast today. I am so excited to connect with you again.
I'm excited too. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Just to let listeners know why I wanted to have this conversation, I reached out to you because I was made aware of particular aspects of your work and your research that really busted open paradigms for me. I mean, they really did shake my world in terms of how I had been conditioned to think about the way that we feed our dogs and my own concerns, especially when I first got into feeding Lucky, the worry of like, am I hitting all the numbers? And what happens if I don't hit the numbers and all that? And it literally, that struck fear and actually stopped me initially from going fully down the fresh journey because I didn't believe I could do it properly. And I was afraid of what the impacts on Lucky's health might be. And I know that a lot of people, and especially a lot of listeners, when they're new to the fresh journey, and even when they're in it for a while, and they've been sort of conditioned to think about feeding in a particular way, it can still feel overwhelming. It can still feel like you're not doing it right. It can still feel like you're never going to know enough. how do we do this? And there's just an awful lot of like emotional baggage, I think, around how we think about feeding our dogs. So I wanted to have you on today to talk about your experience and your philosophy of feeding, and specifically around these guidelines that have come to dictate so much of the industry, so much of how we think about feeding our dogs. And that's the linchpin that really holds things together for people, where they either feel like I'm sort of defining the way that I'm feeding according to these, or I can let go of this or loosen that up and think a little bit differently. So my hope is that this conversation plants some seeds for people to reflect on what it means to feed our dogs and actually unlearn a lot of the stuff that we've been taught, particularly when it comes to the standards for commercial feeding, and then whether or not that actually relates to fresh feeding.
Great. Yeah, I'm completely on board. Let's get started.
Amazing, amazing. Well, do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about how you even got into canine nutrition in the first place?
Yeah, it always starts with a dog. That's what they say. I had a dog. It was a Labrador, and he started having seizures when he was about 3. Completely helpless at that point. There was no medication. Epilepsy was unheard of back then. And I think that's when I started reading about nutrition. And I luckily found the right people. I found Dr. Ian Billinghurst. I found Dr. Judy Morgan. They were just about, I think Dr. Ian Billinghurst was around for a while. Dr. Judy Morgan had just started posting videos. And it made sense, it made logical sense that food is food. It's a bunch of nutrients, sure, but food is food. And so when I started doing my courses, which was much later after I started, figuring out what to feed my dog, I started helping other pet parents. And then I got onto some courses. And sure, there was mention of guidelines, but honestly, they made no sense to me at all. And they still don't make sense to me. I've been doing this for about 12, 13 years now. I've been, researching canine nutrition. And although I have changed my mindset about a lot of things, that my diets have gone through several iterations. Of course, we're all the time learning about new things. I don't think my mindset about the guidelines ever changed because it just did not make sense. So that's how I got into it. And yeah, through the courses, I found out about NRC, I found out about AFCO, and I went through the guidelines. And I honestly felt like these were made for commercial food, which is a requirement because if you are making a meal that's full of non-species appropriate ingredients. I was going to use some French there, but non-species appropriate ingredients, you need to add some nutrients so the dog gets some nutrients. And so if I had to give you an example, if I'm eating spinach every day, I don't need to fortify it with nutrients. It is fresh spinach. My body knows what to do with it. If I were to eat cereal every day, I have to fortify that food because it's missing a lot of nutrients. The two don't go well together. I'm still kind of shocked with the amount of fear that's been, doing the rounds where people are saying your dog is eating fresh but not eating complete and balanced. If a pet parent is feeding rice and chicken, sure, that's not going to be enough. Does the dog need carbohydrate? No. So feed a well-planned species appropriate diet. It's not rocket science. You can go by ratios, just add in some other ingredients, you're fine. So I think that's where my belief started, largely still holding on to that with a few changes here and there.
I love it. No, I completely agree, and I think it's the reminder of exactly you're exactly right that we have to fortify things that are non-species appropriate, but also
Mhm.
the numbers. When we're looking at where those numbers come from, there's also massive problems with the scientific studies that were done to even determine. So the reality is nobody knows what a human actually needs to eat, and every human is different. And it's the same for our
Yep.
dogs. We don't
Yeah.
actually really know. It's guesswork. Some of it is based off of what we think prey would look like, but even that is a bit off. It's and every dog is different. Some do really well with high percentages of bone, others really can't tolerate bone, all of that kind of stuff. But when it
Yeah.
comes to commercial foods, the sort of for those who are not familiar with like how the sort of in a sense the regulation of what needs to go into those diets, it's based off of problematic studies where they just had to make sure that dogs survived on the food for like six of the dogs survived for like 24 days or something ridiculous like
Mhm.
that. But the
Yeah.
idea behind it too is that if somebody is only ever feeding their dog that food day in and day out, they have to make sure that it meets the minimum requirements
Yeah.
to keep the dog alive. That's
Yep.
what they're based on. Minimum
Yep.
requirements if you're feeding that day in and day out to keep the dog alive. That doesn't translate to how we eat food,
Yep.
right?
It
Like,
doesn't translate to healthy either, the way it's marketed to be. It doesn't. So I think we want our dogs to thrive. Like we spoke the other day, we don't want them to live forever. We want them to be around as long as they need to be around, and we want them to thrive for the time that they're around with us. I think that's good enough, right? To start with.
oh, I love that because again, it's challenging. I understand the kind of forever dog mentality where, of course, you want your dog around for as long as possible. But there's a difference between having a dog around for 15 years. Stacy and I were just talking about this earlier today. 15 years and the last five are really problematic because they're riddled with health challenges versus, 10 really good years. And it requires a bit of a mindset shift for us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think even when my dog was older, with epilepsy, dogs don't live that long. They never did, at least from what I gather. He was close to about 13 when he passed away. And I think it was the diet, it was the CBD that helped him, right? But I do, um, in a way, realize now, later, after he's been gone, that I was doing everything in my control to hold on to him, to keep him around. I'm like, okay, what supplement can I add? And I was doing multiple things at that point. And I realize now that the last couple of years, at least, he had joint pain. I was using supplements. It would work for a while. They would stop working. He was on epilepsy meds. So, it was a bit of a struggle for him. And it was my selfishness to want to keep him around that I was doing everything in my control. And now I've learned better. So, I tell pet parents with senior dogs who are deteriorating, I'm like, listen, just let them be. Just let them be. We'll try adding these supplements, but I've noticed a lot of senior dogs reject supplements. Have you noticed that?
I
Have
have.
you?
I have noticed that. Yeah. Yeah.
It's crazy. It's almost like they're saying, "Hey, I'm done. Just let me be."
But I was having a conversation with one of my mentors, Katie McCall, when we did the episode on kidney disease. And we were
Mhm.
talking about the various stages, not just of the disease, but that the dogs go through and how you can best support them. And that at the end of the day, quality of life is such an
It's
important question to like be asking ourselves like is my dog actually having a quality of life, and even though we want to try, I think kidney disease is a fantastic example of what you're talking about where you want to manage everything. We're trying to
yeah,
control everything. There's a lot of different factors to think about, in terms of like calcium and phosphorus and protein and all these things that we know we need to think about. But she said in that interview, and it was so poignant because Katie also comes from a vet nurse background, and she formulates diets for individuals, but also for companies. So she's very versed in formulation, which we'll talk about in a minute. But she was like, at the end of the day, if the dog wants to eat oatmeal, let them eat oatmeal. If the
yeah,
dog just wants to eat some steak, let them eat some steak, right? Instead of trying to micromanage whether or
yep.
not that's fitting the profile of what we quote unquote
Mhm.
should be feeding the dog like that. And I think
Yeah.
that speaks to, although it's a slightly different kind of tangent to this, but it does reflect back those questions of what does it mean for our dogs to thrive? Exactly what you're
Yeah.
saying. Like, and how do we give them the best life experience? And food is part of that.
Yep, yep. I think it's one of the most important parts of their life. Giving them a good diet, giving them good exercise, allowing them exposure to the environment. These are things that, I mean, I think food is so important. We see, I think, with our work as well, where there are a lot of dogs that come to us when it's too late. Most times when it's too late, there's severe inflammation of the body, there's severe skin irritation, and you're helpless. At that point, you're trying to do everything with the diet, you're trying to add in every little ingredient that's going to help. And it's a hopeless situation.
Yeah.
So I think that should be the primary thing pet parents do. Focus on, working with your dog, building their personality or training or behavior, whatever they call it these days. I'm not really sure. And focus on a good diet because that's setting the baseline for a dog to remain healthy.
Yeah. So I guess that kind of begs the question too of how do we generally, but how do you approach what it means to give a dog a good diet? And how do you, I guess maybe this is a good time to sort of delve into as well the way that you debunked a lot of those numbers that, because again, those numbers are in our minds designed to give our dogs the right diet, where we think if we hit these nutrient profiles, that we're doing the right thing. But again, we have to remind ourselves that was just for dogs to survive, not to thrive, for
Hmm.
one. And also,
Yep.
that was designed if you're feeding that commercial food day in and day out. So, could you talk a little bit about the process that you went through for coming to a better understanding of what a dog needs and what you discovered in particular when you did some tests on some beef livers?
Yeah. So I think, like I said, my gurus back then were Dr. Ian Billinghurst and Dr. Judy Morgan. I did read some other books and, did a couple of courses. And I think it's when the NRC courses became a big deal. Like everybody was getting into canine nutrition. And I had a client who wrote to me one day and said, I've been told that there's no zinc in this diet. And I looked at the diet and there's a good amount of meat, there's a good amount of beef liver, or, any kind of liver for that matter. There is zinc in meat, and it's the most bioavailable form of zinc. You can tell me that this form of zinc is more bioavailable. It's in this little jar. You just need to put a couple of drops. It's still, I can't get past that. When food is giving you what you need, why are we adding more? So that got me thinking, and I was like, okay, I think I spent a couple of months wondering what I was doing wrong. And then one fine day, I just had this idea. I said, I called my team. I said, hey, can we source liver, beef liver, from 4 different places? And let's send it for testing. So I called the lab. I said, I just want the zinc test done. And I think when I got the results, it was about a week later. I was shocked. There was like a fourfold difference in the 4 samples. I have them written down here. It was ranging from 3.32 mg per 100 grams to 19.52 mg per 100 grams. And I was like, wow, that's insane. And that's when I realized that we are going by numbers that are available on databases, which we're using randomly, right? So, what if you're overcompensating some supplements? I don't think people think about toxicity or what's going to happen when there is too much of something. Even if we are in the range, if you're feeding your dog a species appropriate diet, I do not even know what's going to happen if you are over supplementing a particular mineral. There might be interference, there might be interactions. We know that these things happen. I mean, it's scientifically proven that minerals fight. or they get along. Let's just keep it that way for simplicity's sake. And yeah, so I think it became important to me to stick to fresh ingredients. So you want some more zinc, add a couple of oysters in there. Let's use that. Let's not use a couple of drops. And these ingredients are easily available. We're not in a situation anymore where we can say, hey, that ingredient, it's really hard to find. We're not. There's several companies out there, several manufacturing, fresh food, giving you fresh ingredients. So I think looking at this data, I realized that if we're feeding fresh, it might be more important to also switch your vendors. And, while I'm totally for a rotational diet, right? I'm like, don't feed your dog the same thing every day, alternate between 3 or 4 protein types. And I do recommend keeping red meat constant for at least 50% of the diet, or maybe a few times a week, 3 or 4 times a week. And I think that's when I realized that you need to change your butchers as well. It can't be the same person you can source the same thing from consistently. So these values gave me that insight, rotational diet and changing your vendors.
Absolutely. And also changing cuts of meat is something that I
Oh, yeah.
recommend too,
Oh,
that
yeah.
but it speaks to exactly what you're bringing up, that rotation is key and the body knows what to do with
Mhm.
food in a
Yeah.
very different way than it knows what to do with lab formed substances. But I think too what your from my perspective, when I came across your studies with that, like I said, it was literally paradigm shifting because it was like, oh my God. Like you said, it's fourfold difference. It's not
Mhm.
a milligram here and there. It's like significantly different.
Yeah.
So I often say to clients, and listeners have probably heard me say this too, that like there is no way that I can actually tell you how many milligrams of zinc are in that particular piece of beef liver that you were cutting up and putting it that in this into that bowl to meet
Yeah.
this formulated recipe it's a spreadsheet Frankensteining ingredients and numbers together to give you
Okay.
to give you a final quote unquote balance, right?
Mhm.
There
Yeah.
is, and I should take a step back and say I'm not demonizing formulating.
Mhm.
Formulating has its place and it's a
Mhm.
tool. It's a tool, but we have to recognize its shortcomings. And part of
Yeah.
its shortcomings is that it begs the question in relation to what as well. I say this
Mhm.
about Chinese medicine all the time too, and I think that's one of the real pieces of wisdom that I've gained from being exposed to traditional Chinese medicine, which is that sense of like in relation to what. So when we're saying a dog is deficient or this diet on a
Mhm.
spreadsheet is deficient in zinc, in relation to what? In,
Yeah.
right? And how
Mhm.
do we actually know that? And I think your studies proved we don't know. And I think for me personally, and one of the reasons I was hoping to share this with listeners is that it took away some of the fear for me of feeding fresh, of that good girl tendency, right? Which is tied into the people pleasing stuff, all these lovely things that we were talking about that we are so generally genuine gifted with as women, right? Like how generous universe. But I feel like it really where I was getting stuck on having to get it right, having to be perfect, the fear of failure, the fear, the shame of not of feeling like I wasn't doing it right, the guilt, all
Mhm.
of those horrible emotions.
Yeah.
Seeing those numbers, it was like a flash. It really was where it was like, "Oh my God, I can release control."
Yeah.
If these formulas, if these numbers from AFCO, NRC, FEDIAF are not the Bible, they're not capital T truth.
Mhm.
How does that then change the way that I'm approaching feeding my dog? And actually, what is the ripple effect of how I'm engaging with my dog from a state of love versus a
Yeah.
state of fear and control?
Yeah. Pick another point there when it comes to checking for nutrients, right? I was reading up on this and I realized that apparently the liver doesn't store zinc proportionately. There's different parts of the liver that will have different quantities of zinc when you test it. So generally what these labs do is that they grind up the liver and then test the zinc quantity, right? So if you have a little dog and you're just giving them a teeny tiny bit of liver, it is possible that there's very little zinc in that teeny tiny bit, and the next day there's a lot of zinc in that teeny tiny bit of liver. And it also matters what the prey is fed before, it's being butchered. So if I think in this particular case, it's possible that the cow was given extra zinc in its diet and it was stored in the liver. So if you do not know, I don't know how people say with so much conviction on a spreadsheet that this is how much your dog's getting. Are you going to that city, checking that specific sample, telling the person that, hey, so this is exactly what you're getting? Even kibble is not tested. Every batch is not tested. They have a premix. They produce the kibble and then they top it up with the premix. So technically, if I send it for testing, I'm pretty sure it's going to differ in the values that are listed on the label.
Totally.
So,
Well, and that's why we've seen so many recalls from kibble as
yeah,
well.
yeah. So I would fear the term balanced and complete because I cannot tell you that a diet is balanced and complete. Honestly, I don't even believe that if you ask me how many calories are in this diet, I could be way off. I could be way off because I don't know where you're sourcing your stuff from. All I can tell you is that, listen, it's going to differ from city to city. It's going to differ based on the season. Look at, because seasonally there are animals that get more fatty, there are animals that get more leaner. So the fat could differ, the cuts could differ in nutrients. Are you getting, which cut are you getting? There are people who are using chicken breast, people who are using chicken thighs, both very different. So it's it would be scary for me to tell you that this diet is balanced and complete and easier for me to tell a person, hey, just feed rotational diet. You're okay. Your dog's going to be just fine. And I don't think, have you ever met any dog that walked up to you and barked, almost meaning to say, I think there was less calcium in my diet today. Or I think yeah, I need to go to a pharmacy and grab some zinc.
Well, do you know how much calcium you've had today? I mean, that's the
Yeah.
thing, right? And I'm not making light of people's concerns. I get it, and we do need to be conscientious.
Yeah.
And we know that, for example, that our food is less nutrient dense as a result of the industrial farming processes and all that. I get that. But at
Yeah.
the same time, I think we have taken it to a level of absurdity in the dog sphere. I mean, I think it's absurdity doesn't even actually do it justice. Like I have never seen anything like it, and I think that it creates a lot of divide for people. I think it puts people off feeding fresh food when we know that that's such an important thing to do. When we're seeing the studies that are coming out more and more about the impacts of ultra processed food on
Yeah.
humans. And we're seeing it in the dogs as well, that, any level of fresh food is going to be better. So
Mm-hmm.
it's upsetting to me that this kind of fixation on what we're putting into our dog's bowl based off of some loose science and also not actually reflecting what is going into that dog's bowl.
Yeah.
It's a strange space to be in, to be honest. And it worries me that people are made to feel so frightened and so off-put by feeding fresh, when in reality, it is totally what nature
Mm-hmm.
intended. Their bodies, like our bodies, know what to do with food,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. So I
It's just,
think even for us over here, there are pet parents who have been feeding their dogs rice and chicken. They call that fresh food, which is great. Most of them are not even aware that dogs don't need rice and that it can trigger several issues, in the body. But I think one of the arguments that you hear from these pet parents as well is that, hey, my dog ate chicken and rice or yogurt and rice for 12 years and my dog did just fine. And I'm like, great. I had an uncle who lived up to 90. He drank every day, he smoked every day, and he was just fine. So, it's either fluke or if this person did not have these habits or the dog was fed better, they would have lived longer. Or there's something genetically great going on for this dog or the person and they did well. I don't think that's an example. Even when it comes to fresh feeding, I don't use that analogy. I don't say, look at my dogs, they're eating fresh food and they're fine because there could be a kibble fed dog that's doing fine. So, I'm just going by how many vet visits I've had. Zero in the last 4 years. And my dogs have never been sick. Knock on wood, knock on everything. But so that for me is a good gauge. For me, the fact that they haven't been ill and I haven't had to do that many vet visits, that is a better gauge than just looking at my dog and saying they're doing fine. There are dogs on species appropriate diets who tick fever is a big deal in this country, right? We're in a tropical country. Every second dog's getting tick fever these days. It's very hard to get rid of ticks. But I've noticed that the kibble fed dogs take a really long time to recover. The dogs on a good diet, their platelets are back up in 3 days. They're doing great. They're recovering so well. So that's another example there. Instead of just looking, here's some valid examples of how dogs are doing well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think too, one of the things that I recommend to pet parents as well, like if they're concerned, is certainly to be talking to their vet and doing things like, say, yearly bloods, for example, just to make sure that everything is going well. I mean, this is something that I've had to consider with Lucky, who started off with kidney issues. So I have to just keep an eye on his kidney values.
Mhm.
But even with that, I've noticed a stark improvement with feeding him fresh food and looking at, prioritizing moisture. I think we forget to talk about, like, water is the number one nutrient that any body
Mhm.
needs. And that's
Yeah.
something that's completely absent for the most part in kibble. And so looking at, it's feeding the terrain, I think, like what you're talking about, and how we can support the body to be resilient. So whether that's in the face of an acute illness that kind of crops up, or even in the case of something like kidney disease, a more chronic state, where
Mhm.
actually you're giving the body the resources to be able to find its own balance and to stay in harmony. And I think that can't be overstated, the importance of doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I think a lot of pet parents who move from kibble as well initially start panicking. They're like,
Yeah.
my dog's not drinking any water. And I'm like, that's fine. It's perfectly fine. There's so much moisture in fresh food. Your dog's not going to feel thirsty. So I think a lot of people go into a state of panic and they start adding water or bone broth to the meal, and I have to stop them. I'm like, don't do that. They're probably going to feel more bloated. Just let them be. If they're thirsty, they're going to drink. They are adults from another species, not our babies.
Yeah.
They know their bodies. Just
Yeah.
let them decide.
I love it. I'm glad you brought that up because we had talked last time as well about the power of self-selection.
Hmm.
And I'd love to hear how you have been incorporating this because you've witnessed some really amazing things, but also to your point, and I think this is something that's so important for us to remember. We limit our dog's agency just by the nature of how we have them living with us. But the reality is they are sentient beings with an incredible instinct and an
Yeah.
incredible sense of what it is that they need. And it's up
Mhm.
to us to help give them access to a variety of different things, including things like rotational feeding, but also
Mhm.
different environments, different plants, different types of dirt, etc., right? Like different environments for them to kind of
Mhm.
explore in because
Yeah.
of their innate ability to seek out what it is that they need in order to
Mhm.
balance. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what you've noticed with self-selection, because I think it's so interesting.
Yeah, I think there are very few people who notice or even observe what their dogs are looking for, even when it comes to diets, right? Most people, if they have a dog that's picking out certain things in the diet, they're immediately called picky eaters. And I'm like, your dog's not being picky. Your dog wants something done a certain way. So if there are people who reach out to me saying, my dog doesn't eat veggies. I'm like, okay, try grinding them, try cooking them really well, see what they prefer. And sure enough, the dog wants to eat vegetables. They just want it processed a certain way. I'm working with a senior dog who's about 13 and a half right now. And there are days when she only chooses to eat boiled broccoli in her diet. It's exhausting for the pet parent, I get it, right? But she is so particular about what's in her bowl. And I think the other day I received a message from her saying, I think my dog ate papaya for the first time. I have offered this fruit to her like for 13 years and she's not touched it. So I think in a way, dogs also know because of the gut microbiota asking for different
Yeah.
things. It's basically, we are, I think we'd like to think of ourselves as important beings, but it's the gut microbiome that's doing all the work, right? These little things in there are like, hey, I want me some of that. So I think I have started noticing these patterns in my dogs and my clients' dogs. If they eat plants, I'm like, take a picture of the plant. What is the dog eating? And then look at it. And I think I told you about this the other day. I cannot remember big words for the love of me, but there was a particular plant I told you about, and I've noticed dogs that have yeast overgrowth eat that plant. And I think we realize that it doesn't grow in at
Mm-mm.
your location. Yeah. So I've seen that. I've seen dogs eating grass, lemongrass, different kinds of mud. And I also spoke about how my golden likes rolling in horse poo once in a while. He doesn't do it every single time. So sometimes he's rolling in it and sometimes he wants to eat it. I think it's all these little microbes in the gut, working their magic. And even with food, I think I've learned to give my dog some choices. If they, like, I've noticed that my golden doesn't like a raw egg. He needs to have the white cooked and he likes the yolk raw. So I feed it to him that way. My little one, the one you saw the other day, she will eat an egg anyway. She doesn't like them boiled. Like I said, it's difficult for the pet parent, but at the same time, I have started paying so much attention to their choices because I know that it's not them being picky, it's not them being, a brat. A lot of people say, what spoiled dogs? They're not spoiled. I don't think they have that mindset to manipulate you that much. They do a little bit, but not that much. So I think they will inform us of their choices if we are listening.
I think that's the key. Are we listening and are we actually observing them with a lens of curiosity rather
Mhm.
than, like you're saying, this sort of anthropocentric lens where we're assuming they're doing things in the way that we would do them and that we might be manipulative to get something like that, but they're really just they're seeking stuff out. And I agree with you. It is the importance of the microbiome and the role that the microbiome plays is absolutely massive. And I was talking to Dr. Carol Hughes, who has Biome for Pets, and I had mentioned about how just before I think it was like the night before I was talking to her, Lucky had picked out, normally he quite likes broccoli. So speaking of broccoli, he had picked out all of the broccoli florets from his meal and kind of made a circle around the plate with them. And I just mentioned it to her, and she said, well, that will be because not that his microbiome was deficient, because there's sometimes that assumption, or there must be something wrong with the microbiome, but actually it was in the perfect state of balance. And that if he had, there was some compound she mentioned that was in broccoli that would have disturbed that balance. So he knew not just what to seek out, but also what to avoid in order
Yeah.
to keep things in balance. And I just thought, my
Mhm.
God, and yet you're right. So often we'd be like, oh God, he's just being picky. He's just being difficult.
Oh,
when
yeah.
he just knows what he
Uh,
needs at a very kind of core level.
Yeah. What I do is if they leave some stuff out, I hate wasting food. But if it's fresh, if it's just been there, quickly wash it out. Like my little one, Fleur, left out cranberries the other day. She just neatly left them on. I use those Mind Pet platters.
Hmm.
Is that what they're called? Yeah. So it has these little holes, right? These little so she's left the cranberries in there, and I picked them out and I said, "You're eating that tomorrow. I'm saving it." But surprisingly, I put it in her bowl the next day, and my golden ended up eating them. She still left them. So it's amazing how they're doing this stuff. And we call our dogs greedy, we call them picky, we call them brats, but somewhere deep down, there might be exceptions to what I'm saying, but I think somewhere deep down, dogs know. Yeah, they do stupid stuff like eating socks. Where did that come from? I don't know. But at the same time, you also see them with food. They seem really stupid sometimes and very knowledgeable when it comes to food. So that's I don't know, figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But speaking of the microbiome, I know that you have started getting in microbiome tests in India
Mhm.
now. How
Mhm.
are you
Yeah.
finding that? And I know that you are very interested in the microbiome and in the virome and all the good stuff. I'm wondering
Mhm.
what you might be starting to see in terms of patterns for dogs over there.
Yeah, I think with the dogs that were struggling with dysbiosis, we saw the regular culprits, the E. coli and the Campylobacter. And we also saw some unique viruses. I think I was mentioning this to you from other countries. These were discovered in other countries. I have no idea how they got into our dogs' guts. China, South America, I think Mexico, and Japan. And we did see a lot of yeast overgrowth in a lot of these dogs. So I think that is one issue that's really plaguing a lot of dogs these days. I honestly don't know what's happened and why there's so much yeast overgrowth, but that's one, big thing that we've noticed because these tests we're using shotgun metagenomics, which studies the entire microbiome, not just the bacteria, compared to the 16S. Still need to get into, I think, the major analysis part. I definitely want to start working on some research material. Like I said, I probably will not have a roof over my head very soon. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. So I think we're a very nascent phase right now to put out any information out there. But we have noticed that, dogs that were given Bravecto had very low microbial diversity. Dogs that were neutered have some fluctuations in that microbial diversity. Dogs that were given deworming medication had some fluctuation. So we've noticed this. What we did is we, took complete information of the dogs that we were working with, down to what water is your dog drinking,
Wow.
just so we know,
Yeah,
are
yeah.
they drinking filtered water? Are they drinking, RO water? Are they drinking tap water? So,
Mhm.
and we notice some differences there, but it's too early to put it out and say, this is it.
Mhm. Yeah, but it is so fascinating. And I wonder too, you might not have the answer for this too, but something as you were just talking about that, I was thinking about particularly the prevalence of streeties, of the culture of street dogs in
Mm-hmm.
places like India. And I wondered if any testing or if you have any plans for testing their microbiomes in order to understand how that compares
Yep,
to some
that's
more
in the
domestic.
pipeline. That's in the pipeline. And I think out of the sample dogs that we tested, we did pick a couple of streeties who were just about adopted living in a home. But I do want to get samples from dogs actually living on the streets to see what their microbiome is going to be like. And the other thing I want to do an analysis with is shelter dogs, dogs in shelters. We want to see if that kind of, it's a very stressful environment, right? Even if they look happy, even if they're fed, well taken care of, there is going to be some amount of stress there. So I want to do a comparison of a free roaming dog with a shelter dog and see how much variation we see in the microbiome.
That would be awesome. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, dogs at different locations had some changes in their microbiome. So if I worked with a coastal dog, the dog not living by the coast had a different microbiome.
Right.
Not a lot of difference, but you see minor changes here and there.
Mm. It would be interesting too if you are able to kind of track some of those shelter dogs that hopefully get adopted, right? And see how their
Yeah.
microbiome changes in the
Yeah.
home context too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Will not have a roof over my head very soon.
You can come stay with Lucky and me. You're good.
Blowing up a lot of funds on this project, but I can't stop. Help me.
No, I'm just gonna keep encouraging it because I love it and I'll join in. But
It's
it's such,
fascinating.
it is, it's fascinating and it's such important work as well. And I think it's beautiful that you are doing it in a context too that's outside of the kind of typical US, UK, very
Yeah.
Western, very limited perspective. Because I think the reality is too, we need to remember that dogs live all over the world, and it's a very small portion that actually are of the US, UK kind of
Yeah.
overriding culture and food culture and all of that. And there's
Mhm.
so much to learn from dogs that live in different environments. And also, I think there's such a challenge, and I wondered if you had any thoughts about this that you might like to share with the recent real kind of the turning point that we saw for those who are not aware about how the Supreme Court in India decided that they were going to round up all the street dogs and put them into shelters, but they have
Mhm.
since reversed that. Am I correct in that? So
Yep. Yep.
because of the kind of public uproar about these dogs, and I think it was so beautiful the things that I was reading coming out of India of this real recognition that it it's not just about the human environment, that these dogs are of their own culture in these
Mhm.
environments. And actually, many times we as humans are going into their environments where they have lived for
Oh,
generations.
very true. Very true. Very true. I think we fail to respect the ecosystem. We just think of ourselves as the most superior beings. There were people who came out and said human lives matter more. I'm sure they do because you're the apex predator. But at the same time, um, yeah, I think there needs to be some amount of respect for, or a whole lot of respect for the other beings that are coexisting with you. And I think dogs are the closest to humans. We've had a very close relationship for years. We've evolved together. There are similarities between the human and the canine gut microbiome. So I think taking that away would be, more I can say it, ridiculous.
Yeah, on many levels, because there's also a very functional role that the studios play in the wider ecosystem. I mean, I was seeing things about like rodent control and various things like that that are very practical and impactful
Mhm.
for humans. But I think it was
Yeah.
just such a beautiful um, especially the uproar around it. It's such a beautiful testament to how we do need to respect other species and recognize that it is an ecosystem that we're cohabitating. And it begs the questions of actually, then how do we help if we're that apex predator that's kind of in charge of designing spaces
Mhm.
at this point? How do we actually take an interspecies perspective on how we're considering the way that space functions, who's using it, and what their
Mhm.
various needs are?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah, I think even with the treaties, you're so different. It's you see, like the street that I live on, there are about four different packs. And I was speaking to this person who researches street dog packs, right? The free roaming dogs. And it was interesting. I need to mention this. He did a study. I will send the link to you. where they had three bins. If I'm trying to remember this as accurately as I can, but you will read it anyway, right? So there were three bins. There was carbohydrates, or two bins, carbohydrates and protein. Let me stick to two because I don't know if there were fats. So they took these bins to different areas in the city and just place them where they knew these dogs are going to come. And every single time the dogs who when they're left there, or if a human is feeding them, they're fed grain. It's the cheapest. We grow a lot of grain. Or they're given biscuits. There's a brand called Parle-G in India. It's one of the most famous. We have these little chai shops, these little tea shops. They're literally like a 4x4 shack. And you'll see these dogs hanging out there because they have these little coconut biscuits and parlegies. So that's what these dogs live on most of the times, and butcher scraps and garbage scraps. So these dogs, they noticed that the dogs went straight for the protein bin. They sniffed the carbohydrate bin. There was no interest in it, zero interest. In fact, they left that food and walked away. And there was a difference also between how they would go for the bin. So if there was a solo dog and there was a pack of dogs, it's fascinating, that study. If you want to post it somewhere, I'm just going to send it to you. There's another, he's not even a scientist, he's a free researcher. He worked at a school as a teacher. I think he's got a ton of studies on free roaming dogs. So if this interests you, it's coming your way.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think especially having spent time in Mexico too, where there's also a kind of free roaming dog
Lots of free
culture.
roaming dogs.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It
Hmm.
was it was amazing how much it challenged me in terms of coming from a Western perspective of how dogs should be, and
Yeah.
and also seeing this sort of tendency of wanting to rescue the dogs and ship them up north and all that. And that was it was a real reckoning point for me of having to kind of look at it in a different way and understand it. And obviously you want the dogs to be cared for and all of that kind of stuff, but like looking at what does it mean to care for these dogs?
Oh,
And
yeah.
and especially when I then went into working as a canine nutrition consultant, and then I would actually be helping some of those dogs that did get shipped up to Canada and the States, for example,
Wow.
from Mexico,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
seeing the various health challenges and behavioral challenges that many of them faced as a result of being taken out of their native environment to the quote unquote better home, right?
Wow.
But then they struggled with like microbiome issues, for example, and various, also having just to get used to different climates and different expectations of like living in a home when they weren't used to living in a home. They were used to being outside, all of that kind of stuff. So it's really, I'm
Mhm.
very interested in it because it really has challenged a lot of what I assume to be true. So again, today we're sort of talking about like challenging those ideas of what we hold as steadfast truth. And all of a sudden
Mhm.
something opens something up for you and you're like, maybe that's not actually the only way, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then how do we reckon with it? So absolutely.
I think even I have noticed some of our clients who've left the country, moved to another country. The dogs get sick. They have constant loosies, and I think some of them start vomiting, and it takes a really long time for their body to adjust. I think it's because of the change in environment, change in water, change in food. It's probably more nutrient dense or less nutrient dense. I don't know because we don't have nutrition data locally. There's a book that's really hard to get. So I think most people are going by USDA. And I don't know how it's working out for these dogs, but they do go through some of them go through severe dysbiosis before they start to get better.
Yeah. Well, I've even noticed, I mean, I don't think it's severe, but I have noticed in part when I moved Lucky from Mexico to the
Hmm.
UK, but I also, I guess like as thankfully being in the field and being aware of these things, I started preparation before we actually left and boosting certain things, especially like I mentioned, he tends toward kidney issues. So making sure that I was really bolstering his kidneys and giving him supplements to support that before
Mm.
we moved, during the move, and then after the move. But I've become very aware that like he's going to probably have a full year of going through different things, like because we're going to be going through seasons that he's not experienced there, so
Yeah,
that means that there's going to be different grasses he's never been exposed to before,
true,
and
true.
all
Yeah.
of that stuff that you don't necessarily think about at
Hmm.
first, that
Yeah.
has a very direct impact on the dog's body. And so then it always
Yeah.
comes back to, so how do we support the balance
Yeah,
with
that's
where
an
they're at
interesting
now?
point. Yeah, yeah. So as humans, I think most of us adjust pretty well to a different season, right? Is it because dogs are not inherently travelers that they generally tend to stay in one location? I wonder if that's kind of in their DNA and moving to another location is probably just putting that out of whack.
I'm
The
sure.
that microbiome out of whack. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I'm
it.
sure. And I think
Right.
too, especially I can speak from Lucky's experience or my experience of doing this with Lucky. Like he had no idea what was going on, right? Like I'm taking him out
Yeah.
of the home that he knew, sticking him
Mm-hmm.
on a plane, which he'd never been on before, then sticking him on a boat. And like, but as a human, you know what's going on. Like you're told, even as a kid, that you're told
Yeah.
on this trip. So there's certain expectations, and you're being talked
Mm-hmm.
through it. He didn't know, and he didn't have any kind of frame of reference. So the amount of stress that his body was under as well, which we know there's a link between dysbiosis and stress and,
Oh, yeah.
all of that. So
Mm-hmm.
but that's where I think too, when you come prepared with knowing that those sorts of things are going to be stressful for your dog, and you understand what are some different ways that I can use food and different nutraceuticals to help support the
Mm-hmm.
dog, and
Yeah.
also what can I be doing in terms of enrichment to help support them, and all of that kind of stuff comes together
Mm-hmm.
to help our dogs thrive, which is what you brought up in the beginning, and I think that's the true aim. What does it look like for our dogs to actually
Yeah.
thrive?
Yeah. And I think even finding a balance between what you're doing, because there are some pet parents who want to do so much that every little supplement they find that says antioxidant, anti-cancerous, you know, they're just loading up the bowl with these things. And I'm like, hang on, let the food do its job. Let's monitor blood reports, do your scans, be regular with that kind of stuff. If we see that something's off, then we can start fixing that. Don't just dump everything in the bowl because I am not sure if this thing is going to work later when we really, really need it,
That's a
right?
beautiful point.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who preemptively want to add green lip muscle to their dog's diet. I'm like, cool, do it. Do it maybe once a week. Don't do it every day. Because when your dog eventually does develop joint issues, then I know that green lip muscle is out of the question. Then I need to use something else. So I'm like, let's kind of, but again, it might differ from dog to dog, right? But we know about, I can't remember who said this, but it was a herbalist who spoke about milk thistle. And they said, don't use it very often. If you're doing a detox, use it for a few days, give it a break, and do it once every month or once every 2 months. That is when it's going to remain effective. So if I am preemptively just giving you a load of things, in the hopes that your dog is going to live forever, when I really need those supplements, they're probably not going to be as effective as I want them to be.
That's such a good point. It's such a good point. And it's also a reminder that more is not always better.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Keep it simple. That's been my I think that's one theory I've stuck to, even with the fear that came out with the AFCO and the shaming that I went through, that you're not following guidelines. I'm like, sure, I know they're there. I know that these nutrients are important, but can we just follow a food-based approach, not a nutrient-based approach? Because if you're just sitting and calculating everything, you're probably not even going to enjoy your meal. There's so much stress. It's maybe your dog's reading into that and you're like, Okay, that was so much pressure to make my meal, so maybe I should be stressed out now.
Yeah, and the amount of powders that might be going in and the amount of different supplements that they don't necessarily like. And again, that comes back to the kind of quality of life issue as well of you want them to enjoy their food, especially since food is so important to them. It's such a big part of their day, a big part of their lives. Like how it
Mhm.
and that's the value of fresh food is that you can make it so enjoyable.
Yeah, you can. Even with the organs, I've noticed there are some dogs who can eat up to 25% organs in their diet, and they do just fine, right? And there are some dogs who want a little less, maybe 20%, maybe 15%. I'm like, it's okay. That's how much a dog's body requires. I can't, in a way, come out and say that this is exactly what your dog should eat in terms of percentage. Even that theory doesn't hold good. Each dog is different. So maybe I will start with a base diet saying, let's start with this. And okay, your dog had soft poop. I'm like, let's cut back on the organs a bit, see how your dog's doing. And then we'll take it from there. It's not complicated, but a lot of people who have dogs are, I think, made to feel afraid. A lot of times, a little bit of loose poop, rush to the vet. Oh, your dog has GI issues. Here's kibble, and immediately put your dog on kibble. And I'm like, hang on, no, fast your dog. Give the gut a rest. Let it reset because there's so much energy going into digestion that your dog's probably doesn't even have the energy to recover from that minor GI upset. If there is gunk building up in the gut, it does happen. Our environment has so many toxin. It needs to come out from somewhere. And that's the best, I don't know, outlet
Yeah.
for it out. So once in a while, if my dog has soft poop or they put out something that looks like dung, I'm fine. I'm like, here's your bone broth. Let's stop solid food. That's what I would do if I had indigestion. I'm not going to go to the doctor, come back with a bag of food that was made at a manufacturing unit with synthetic. They tell us go home, eat fresh food, drink soup, drink bone broth, drink juices. They don't give you a bag and they say this is balanced and complete. If you do not eat this for the next 15 years of your life, you are going to be dead. Nobody does that to humans. So why are we obsessing over dogs?
I know that that is the question that Stacy and I ask all the time and we ask ourselves. And I wonder if you have an answer. I don't have an answer, but I do theorize that in part, well, I think that there's this sort of insidious possibility of it being for profit, like companies making money, because the whole balanced and complete thing is a marketing tool. That's what it came from. It was a
Yeah.
marketing concept. It's not actually a really developed idea based off of solid science that this is exactly what a dog needs. Again, we do need to have some guidelines. We do need to know that you are giving sources of vitamin E, that you're giving sources of iodine, etc. Because I mean, I'm sure you've seen it too. I've certainly seen fresh food diets done really badly, where they're
Mhm.
completely missing food groups, it feels like,
Yeah.
like at
Yeah.
those essential nutrients. But so long as
Mhm.
you have an idea, so long as you know basically what a dog needs, roughly what
Mhm.
they need, and you're offering rotation so that you're offering the body the opportunity to take up those nutrients as it needs to, then you're generally okay. And again, you adapt to your individual dog because I saw this when I was visiting with Stacy when she and I loved comparing Ted and Lucky because they're perfect for everything that we are doing with Fetch in terms of giving you polar opposite examples. So you can see it in
Mhm.
practice. Like
Mhm.
two dogs in just completely different. Ted is a very warm, bordering on hot dog, like from a Chinese medicine perspective. Lucky is very cool. So
Mhm.
you can see it in terms of their behavior. You can see it in terms of the types of proteins that they crave, what they do better
Mhm.
with, all of that kind of stuff. And we just loved putting it into practice of just seeing that like Ted could devour, he could have a commercial 80-10-10 that so it has approximately 10% bone in it. And he could
Hmm.
still eat like a quail body or a turkey neck or something like that daily and be fine.
Hmm.
Lucky, on the other
Yeah.
hand, could he would struggle with a chicken wing sometimes. I'd have to do like say half a chicken wing because we're monitoring the stools. I would
Yeah.
notice
Yeah.
because he's a smaller dog and
Hmm.
he struggles with that. So you just, but then what I would do if he was a little bit constipated, like the next meal, he just doesn't get a bone. Maybe the next
Yeah.
day he doesn't get a bone and he gets a bit more mince or maybe
Yeah.
I add a
Hmm.
bit more bone broth
Hmm.
into like
Yep.
you would just in a more what I would say is like a natural rhythmic way rather than but he's supposed to have so many milligrams of calcium today. So even though he was constipated, I still have to give him this bone because otherwise what he's, do you know what I
That's a
mean?
great point. Yeah, 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 that's a great point. Yeah. And I think my dogs are that way. I live with two, and they're very different. They're the same size, by the way, but my little one, I mean, I say little one, she's just 3 months younger to the elder one, but okay, never mind.
She's the
Uh,
baby.
yeah, she's the baby. And she can handle about two chews per day. I do a lot of raw meaty bones, a lot of raw meaty bones. And she's largely okay. And then one fine day, I just see this little bit of crumbly poop. It's whitish. And I'm like, oh, we need to cut back on this. I can't get away from giving them chews because they will chew me up. So I give them, so I give her a trachea. She wants to chew something. I'm like, here's your trachea. We manufacture freeze-dried stuff. So I have freeze-dried trachea. It's still crunchy, but it's still rehydrated just a bit. And I'm really high on this moisture thing. So it's just about rehydrated. She gets that. And a Twee, my golden, can eat 5 bones a day and still have great poop. Still have great poop. So I really don't know how that works.
Different dogs with different systems, but like to your point, you adapt according to that particular dog and just monitor the poop and monitor the digestion.
Mhm. Honestly, like I said, when we started our conversation, I would be afraid to say balanced and complete because I knew I would be lying. For me, it's more logical to say, this is fresh food. This is what a dog would eat in the wild, as far as we know right now. And we're trying to mimic that ancestral diet because we know that they have evolved for their DNA to require this food, for their body to, require this food. And they did great all these years. If they didn't, they would have evolved to become carb eating or herbivores, which they're not. The teeth, the stomach acid, the lack of salivary amylase, it's literally evidence that this is what we're meant to eat. And there's no evidence whatsoever that they need to eat balanced and complete, even with the kibble companies who I think I've gone through a couple of studies. I really get annoyed when I start reading those studies. So I try to avoid putting myself in that situation. But even if you look at those studies, these dogs went for the fats first, right? So what did they do? They laced the kibble with fats to make it appealing. If that's your solution, instead of giving your dog actual fats, giving your dog kibble laced with rancid fats just to get them to eat, how is that not, sounding illogical to anyone who is convinced that this is great food?
Hmm.
Yeah,
I know.
it's.
Dare I ask you what your views are on the push for vegan dog food as a way of trying to solve sustainability issues, for example?
I think I don't even work with pet parents who want vegetarian diets because I understand you have this moral belief and you want your dog to, eh, you know, say it bluntly, suffer along with you eating a non-species appropriate diet, but I don't want that on my conscience. I don't want to go to bed thinking I put a dog on a vegetarian diet and I know that these pet parents are going to come back to me, if not even in 6 months, maybe 3, 4 years later, saying that my dog has arthritis or some other condition, right? I think even a well-formulated vegan diet is not something I am, um, in agreement with, because for me, it's equivalent to saying, here's your processed food. Every day, you have the nutrients your body requires, and it works. So it still quite illogical. Why? It would be like giving a goat meat just because I'm on a carnivore diet. Just because your dog's eating it doesn't mean that your dog enjoys it or that they're going to thrive on it. It's not something that they're biologically designed to eat. And I think if we continue on this path, um, they might just end up looking like, I think the anatomy is going to change. It has to change to adapt to what we're feeding them. So we're no longer going to have dogs. We're going to have some other animal that needs to be kept in a barn. It's as simple as that.
Hmm. No, I agree with you. And I think, one of the things that kind of concerns me is that in this sort of push for trying to use dogs as the vehicles, like it's they're test subjects in many respects because again, we don't have long-term data either on how
Yeah.
dogs fed a vegan diet are actually thriving, right? The body
Mhm.
is incredibly adaptable, so the body can do well for a while until it can't do well for a
Yeah.
while. So we don't
It's kind
have
of great.
yeah, we don't have the studies for it. But I also think it's so problematic and is kind of related to the topic of the streeties as well, with how we see ourselves in regards to a
Mhm.
relationship with other species. And I think it's I just love getting to talk to you about these kinds of things because I think they're important questions for us to be asking beyond just what do I put in my dog's bowl? But
Yeah.
the dogs become the vehicle for really questioning these bigger questions, these bigger issues that we're facing. And I just find that our attempt to try to resolve problems that we have created as humans by putting dogs and projecting our moral values as well onto dogs and
Mhm.
having them bear the brunt of it just feels so cruel.
It,
Um,
it, it,
you know?
yeah. Mhm.
It does. It feels like another form of a kind of punishment in many respects. And I think it's just something that I'm seeing come up quite a bit in the media. There's a lot of buzz around it. And I think
Mhm.
there's a desire to kind of jump on it as a potential solution to our problems. But I think we're going to see more and more problems as a result of it, if that's the path that we choose to go down.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Even if you look at the free roaming dog studies in India, even if those dogs eat curry and rice, they're still going out and looking for rodents or meat or butcher shop scraps. So that meat is a requirement. It's not something that I don't even think why we look at it as a choice because it's a necessity. It's like taking away the most important source of protein. Even if you look at studies where they tell you that meat is cancerous, so red meat is causing cancer, you see how much processed meat is being used in these studies. But what people do is they read the headline and then they read the conclusion of the study and reach the conclusion that, oh yeah, okay, so I read this study. You didn't read this study. You read a portion of that study telling you that red meat causes cancer. But what were these people eating along with that processed red meat, more processed food? So it's important, I think, to understand the science. Even, the largest, I think, vegan study that was done for 6 months. It was a questionnaire based study. And a lot of people went gaga over it. It didn't make sense because 6 months is a very short period of time to completely change a dog's um, dietary requirement and say that the dogs did just fine. You would need to do this at least for about, I don't know, I would say 20,000 years, but let's narrow it down, at least for 50 years to see how it's affecting dogs, right? Even if they've been around for that long and the anatomy hasn't changed, this is very interesting. I think Dr. Ian Billinghurst in his course mentioned about the farming era. He talks about the farming era and he says dogs were or started being exposed to grain around that time. And that's still a very long time ago. So even if they've been with us throughout that era, why haven't they become grain eating animals? Because their body did not evolve that way. So I think if we were to just look at dogs as dogs and not, I don't know, our babies who need to respect our moral values and uh, ethics, we, I think, will understand that as much as we want it to be a different way, the species has not evolved to eat anything else apart from, I think, a major chunk of their diet is still very wolf-like. There are a few changes, yes, but it's still very wolf-like. It's
Absolutely.
uh, It's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. But if you want to talk about ethics, if you want to talk about your moral values, we can talk about it until the cows come home because no one's winning that, right? We're all coming from a place of emotion. That's not science. It's not logic. If you go by pure science, there is still no evidence that dogs can thrive on a diet apart from anything but raw meaty bones and meat.
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Oh my God, I could literally talk to you until the cows come home as well. I love this so much. Georgina, because I want to point people to your work as well. Where can they find out more about what it is that you're offering? Because you have the microbiome test, you have products in India, you have all sorts of stuff. Where's a good place
Yeah.
for people to learn more?
Or our website, georginaskitchen.com. I wouldn't have called my business that. It was such a, I was sitting with a friend at a restaurant. We were having a couple of drinks, and I said, I need to start this. This has to become a business. I just can't figure out what to name it. And she said, just call it Georgina's Kitchen. I was like, cool. And now it sounds so lame to my own ear.
Not at all. I love it.
This would not have been my preference, but we have a website, georginaskitchen.com. We're on social media, georginaskitchen.blr. That was again another really, I don't know, impractical decision. But yeah, we're on social media. We have a website. Every bit of information about us is on our website.
Perfect. And I will leave the link in the show notes.
Thank
I,
you.
is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you feel is important that we bring up today?
Hmm. Well, I think we covered quite a bit. Yeah, I don't think we've missed out on anything.
Good, good. Well, I do want to ask you one last question that I ask all of my guests. And that is, what do you feel that your dogs, or dogs in general, if you want to reflect on it that way, have taught you about what it means to be human?
Hmm. They've taught me not to move if they're sleeping on my lap. Well, I think what I have learned from my dogs is to respect, their individuality and other beings' individuality. It's, I think I was this kind of person that had multiple boxes and I would box people, dogs, and everything in those boxes. And it was that simple. As I got older as well, and as these dogs came into my life, I think that was one learning I had was to respect individuality. Look at it from a place of, um, yeah, this is what you are, this is who I am, and uh, we'll either agree to disagree or we'll just coexist. It doesn't need to be a fight, it doesn't need to be a conflict. It's just accepting and embracing that we are different from each other. and don't move when your dog's sleeping on your lap.
Living with a Chihuahua, that's definitely like rule number one.
I watched him there. He did those little circles, tried to find a spot. I think I lost focus a couple of times because I was like, okay, move, Alexia. I can't see him.
I know he's the star of the show for sure, for sure. And that blanket was nice, and he's made his own little nest out of it.
Oh,
Life with a dog. I love it. I wouldn't change it for a thing. Georgina,
yeah, me
thank you.
neither.
I know they're such gifts. Thank you so much for your time and your energy and your wisdom today. I know that listeners are going to take so much from this. And like I said, I will leave all the links in the show notes. So if you want to contact Georgina or learn more about what she's doing, you can just check out the show notes.
Thank you for having me. And thank you so very much for your beautiful energy and making me feel comfortable throughout this conversation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your beautiful energy too. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for joining me for my conversation with Georgina of Georgina's Kitchen. I hope that you found this helpful. If you would like to learn more about Georgina, how to work with her, and her various offerings, please visit her website, georginaskitchen.com, and follow her on Instagram at georginaskitchen.blr. I've left these links in the show notes too. Remember, there is no one right way to feed your dog, and every dog is an individual. If you would like support in how to feed your dog a fresh food diet that works for them, then come learn Fetch. Download our free starter pack, which will get you started with our favorite bone broth recipe, a guide to figuring out your dog's energetics, a simple tracker, and even an easy energy healing practice. And then come hang out with us in our free Facebook group, Fetch First Light, where we'll help you to put it all together. All the links are in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, please let me know. I always love to hear from you. Okay, until next time.